In this lesson, we'll take the geometry that we created on one side and mirror it over to the other side, and then we'll add some finishing touches. So we're getting near the end. We've built a lot of geometry on one side of the model. You'll notice from working here, we've got the pipes, we've got the engine, we've got the wing, and so we want to be able to get that over to the other side. Now the reason we did this is because we don't want to have to go through the process of building the same thing twice. On symmetrical models like this, it's much easier to build one side and then take that geometry over to the other side. Things like cars, vehicles, boats, things like that typically are going to be more symmetrical, so you can at least use that as a starting point and then add the asymmetry in later on if you want to. So we looked at how we could actually take an individual mesh and create the geometry by or create the mirrored element of that geometry using mirror geometry, but we can also take actual groups and objects. So let's go ahead and look at our hierarchy. So right now we have this wing left, and right now it just has the end and the wing main in it. Let's go ahead and drop our fin inside this, and we'll fix our naming so it'll be wing left fin. Now the pivot of our group is at the origin. So one of the tricks that people will often do is to take this geometry, go ahead and duplicate it, and then scale it negatively across the axis. So setting that scale in the x to -1, it has essentially flipped it across the axis. So you can see we get the symmetrical wing over on the other side. Now one of the things to be aware of is that this group now has a negative transform on it, a negative scale. So if I were to go in now and freeze the transformations, it is going to try to compensate for that by reversing some of the things associated with this. So if I turn off under under lighting, two-sided lighting, we actually, one of these will be reversed, and anything black you'll notice is reversed. So in this case, from the creation of our object, the normals have been reversed. So basically Maya is thinking that this is actually inside out. If you use two-sided lighting, you can't really tell because it's lighting both sides equally. But if you turn that off, you can see the inside versus the outside of the models that you have. Now, in many projects, if you're working on a personal project, this may not be an issue, but it's a good practice to get into, making sure that all of your surfaces are facing the right direction. So in this case, any of these black objects, which in this case was our original wing, if it's a NURBS piece, all you have to do is go to Surfaces, Edit NURBS, and Reverse Surface Direction, and that'll fix it. If it's a polygon, like this fin, we want to go to Polygons, Normals, Reverse Normals. Okay, you can see the end of this also needs to be flipped, so we can reverse the surface direction. Okay, and we can do that with any of our NURBS pieces that we see are black. Okay, coming in here, we can reverse this, and then with our grill pieces, those are polygons. So we just want to come in and reverse those. And that's just a good housekeeping thing to keep in mind as you go through and start your modeling process. The gun as well, depending on how you draw out your curve and how you create your geometry, it could start out that way. And so you can go ahead and do surfaces and reverse surface direction and get that cleaned up. Okay, but just keep in mind that that'll essentially reverse whatever it is that you have if you freeze your negative transform. So here we have an engine group. Let's go ahead and call this engine left. Okay, and right now the pivot is set here, so I'm going to go ahead and group the group, and don't even really have to copy this over, but we'll rename it. We don't have to rename it, and so we'll go ahead and make a duplicate, set that negative scale, and then we can go ahead and freeze our transformations. Then we can drop this engine out of the group here. Okay, and so now we don't have to, but ideally we'd want to come in here and start to fix the normals of these pieces. And we could come in here on all of these and fix those up. Okay, to speed things up a little bit, I'm just going to turn on two-sided lighting and say that we're good to go on that. Okay, now we want to obviously change the name, so we've got now this is not engine left anymore, this is now engine right, and then you want to go through the process of changing the naming on everything underneath. That's something that you'll, as you get into your modeling process and figure out your own methods, you'll figure out the way that you want to name things. You just want to name things because it's if you look at something here in your outliner, you want to be able to see where that actually goes and what that's actually for. All right, same thing for these pipes. We can go ahead and group those, duplicate them, Control D, mirror them across, and then if you want to freeze the transforms, you can. Okay, same thing up here. Go ahead and duplicate this. The pivot's already at the center. Mirror it over, freeze the transforms. Now this, I want to go ahead and polygons, normals, reverse, and we can combine these together. So take both sides of this and say combine. Okay, and then delete our history. Now we've got one piece there. Okay, we can do the same thing up here. Duplicate, pop those over to the other side. So anything that you built on one side, you want to pop it over to the other side. Here's one of the thrusters. We can group that together, duplicate it, pop it over to the other side. So Control G, Control D, and then just flip it over. All right, let's turn our two-sided lighting back on. So you just want to take all of your geometry, flip it over. Anything that you've built on one side, flip it over to the other side. Don't forget this. We'll go ahead and group that, duplicate it, flip it over. Got to have it on that side as well. And then you can just kind of clean up your hierarchy. Go through the process of naming all of your pieces, grouping them together in a way that makes sense. Okay, the one last thing that we want to add geometry-wise is going to be the gas cap, because that's kind of part of the project. We want to be able to connect a fuel line up to this guy. So let's add a cap here. We'll just do this very simply by going into Polygon Primitives, adding a cylinder, and let's go ahead and bring it up over here. Okay, and we can change the radius here a little bit, but let's go ahead and rotate it into position, and you can kind of see where it goes right up here. So we'll kind of rotate it, stick it up here, get our radius correct. Okay, and then we can just kind of stick it into the surface here. We just want it to match up with the surface, so we'll just kind of manually rotate it so it fits. Okay, now I want to create a little bit of an opening here, so let's change the subdivision caps to something like that. Now we can go ahead and select those polygons there. And let me make sure I don't have anything selected on the back. Let's make sure Keep Faces Together is on, and let's extrude that down into the surface. So maybe something like that. And you can add a little bit of detail here. Doesn't really matter what this looks like too much. I'm going to add a little bit of detail coming out on one side maybe. Grab a couple of those polygons and extrude them out here. Maybe a few of these. And extrude those out. Okay, and then let's take this edge on the outside here and bevel that down. We'll change the offset a bit so it's more like that. And then we get something that looks like that. So it's going to be from, you're not going to see it real close, so it doesn't really need to be that detailed. Okay, so you've gone through over the last 2 or 3 hours here of the process of building up this spaceship, and we started with really simple shapes and really simple techniques using curves, using polygons, but step by step you've been able to go in and create the different pieces. Okay, and hopefully you can now take some of those things that you've learned and apply those to different models as you go through the process. Again, if you want to get more in depth in creating models, then I'd encourage you to check out the Introduction to Modeling. There's one more thing that we want to look at before we head on into materials and texturing, and that is working with multiple models. So we've built one model inside of our scene here. What happens if we want to start to combine this with other models? So in the next lesson, let's go ahead and bring in some additional models, and then we'll be finished with the modeling portion, and you can move on to materials and texturing.